Hi, I'm Simon, and this is The Ordinary Filmmaker. Today I'm going to be comparing the Canon EOS 90D to the Canon EOS RP. So if you're on the fence as to which camera to get, stay with me to the end and I'll help you make that decision. Because right now these cameras are really priced at the same price point. One week you'll catch the 90D being more expensive than the EOS RP. The next week that will switch and you can get the RP cheaper. Currently, the Canon EOS RP is $200 less than the 90D. So which one's better? Well, let's quickly do a high-level summary before getting into the details. The Canon EOS RP has that full-frame sensor at 26 megapixels. It's going to shine in photography, and it's going to allow you to do really well in low light and create a nice blurred background and give you that bokeh. But the 90D has a lot more features and really does provide a lot better value. In terms of weight, once you put on a lens, there really is no savings in weight. While the EOS RP appears to be 200 grams lighter, that weight savings disappears once you put that heavy RF glass on. And yes, you can get EF glass, which weighs less, but then you have to put that adapter on, so that weight savings is more or less a moot point. Now, let's go ahead and get into the details. Audio is very important. I've said this time and time again. Picking the right camera matters. You can have the best picture in the world, but if your audio is scratchy, you've got a lot of noise from wind, or it just sounds hollow, it takes away from that video. So I highly recommend getting a good mic. Mics don't cost an arm and a leg. I'm currently wearing a lapel mic, and that cost me about $200. My camera also has a shotgun mic. It also costs about $200. Each one for different scenarios. Being in front of the camera, doing events or YouTube type videos, a lavalier or lapel mic is the best option. Run and gun outdoors, a shotgun mic that plugs directly into the back of the camera is fine. But this is where you need to pay attention. Most DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, especially in the consumer and prosumer space, do not have very good preamps. If I was recording directly into the camera right now, you'd hear hiss, it would sound hollow, it wouldn't sound very good. Pick the right mic for the right scenario. In this regard, in terms of audio, both cameras do equally as well. Neither camera is better than the other. The bulk of this video is going to be looking at how well the Canon EOS R and the 90D deliver the capabilities that I'm looking for. I'm going to go through about 15 different capabilities, and it's going to seem like it's a lot of information, because it is. But what I'm going to do is, in the top of the screen, I'm going to keep a summary of how well each camera meets that capability. If you see green, then yeah, it's able to deliver that capability. If you see red, no, it's not going to deliver that capability, or it doesn't do it very well at all. And if I use the color orange, that indicates it's somewhere in between. It's not good enough to say, yes, it does it, but it does enough that it doesn't score poorly. The first feature is autofocus. Since 2013, Canon's dual pixel autofocus has been second to none in the DSLR and mirrorless market. These cameras have further improved on that technology. It does a really good job. The Canon 90D's focus is really good, as is the Canon EOS RP. They both score well. Now in detail, things get a little more complicated. Both cameras deliver good detail in 1080p, but in 4K they're soft. This matters because I love 4K, not because I shoot my projects in 4K, I shoot all my projects in 1080p. But when you capture that 4K, and you can downsample it to 1080p. So I capture that 4K video, put it into a 1080p project, and the detail is going to be really, really good. But now if I zoom into that 4K frame space, I can only go so far without it appearing soft. And that's a big negative for me. Neither camera does 4K with enough detail. Both cameras do slow motion, but I'm not happy with the outcome. The EOS RP can do 1080p at 60 frames a second. That's not bad, but in today's day and age, all the competition does 120, so that's a bit of a letdown. And in 4K, there's no slow motion at all. Now the 90D shines here because it does deliver 120 frames a second. There's no focus. Now I'm saying there's no autofocus, there's no manual focus. Once you click record, you cannot adjust your focus. This is a problem. You can't use a shallow depth of field. You basically need to set the f-stop to at least a minimum of 4, or maybe 5.6 or 8, and what that will do is give you a greater depth of field so you can keep your subject in sharp focus while filming slow motion. A lot of reviewers have panned the 90D saying that without autofocus, 120p is absolutely useless. That's not true. You can use 120 frames per second in 1080p on the 90D and get really good results. You just have to change your f-stop. Experiment. Try f4, f5.6, or f8. And I think you'll be happy with the results. Now, neither the 90D or the EOS RP provide in-body image stabilization. But you can stabilize your video through electronic means in both cameras. You can also stabilize your video through lenses. Canon offers over 107 EF and EFS glass, 6 RF glass, and 8 more lenses of the RF to be coming out in 2020. I would not recommend using the electronic stabilization. Here's why. When you turn on electronic stabilization, it does crop in, so you lose a little bit less detail. No big deal. But the real negative is every now and then, and it's hard to tell when the camera is going to do this, it's going to create some weird warping effects in the background. It's distorted. You can't undo that. However, if you use software like Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro, you can stabilize your video there. And if it doesn't work out, you can undo. Yes, use lenses that have image stabilization, but think about how you want to frame your subject in your scene. If you're going to use your body, kind of tense up and hold the camera steady. The stabilization from the lens will do a good job, and then in post-production, stabilization within the software can take it to that next level and do a really good job. Using a gimbal if you're running is also very effective. I think I've only ever ran once when I was filming, and that was my son the first time he was learning to ride a bike, and it was a challenge to try and keep the video stable. And in those cases, a glide cam would work really well. Or as I mentioned in a previous video, strap a tripod onto your camera and walk around holding the center leg, and that extra weight will help you stabilize. A lot of people like to talk about color science. I don't. It sounds like state of the art. It means nothing. To me, color science, and what I understand others to refer to, is about color accuracy. So the video that I'm shooting now, when I take it into the computer in post-production, there's very little that I have to do. Now, this is especially true if I'm shooting outdoors. Canon colors are very accurate, the skin tones are very good. I really don't have to fiddle around with too much. I might adjust the midtones a little bit, or the darks, or the highlights, very, very little. Frame rates. So these are what I consider the 3 basic frame rates that every camera must have in every resolution. That's 24 frames a second, which is pretty much standard for movies, not always. It gives you that cinematic look. You get more of a blur, motion blur. 30 frames a second is what a lot of TV shows shoot in. 30 frames a second gives you that natural look. You don't get very much motion blur at all. And 25 frames, that's a standard frame rate for PAL, which is Europe, Australia, and other regions in the world. I like to shoot in both 24 and 30. In 1080p, I can shoot in 24, 30, 25 frames a second. But on the EOS RP, I don't have access to 30 frames a second. And that's kind of a showstopper for me, unless I'm willing to just always shoot in 24 frames a second. And here's why. If my project's in 1080p and most of the times I'm shooting in 30 frames a second, I can't use that footage from 4K because the frame rates don't match up. It's not going to look right. And that's a real negative for me. Now on the 90D, it's not a problem at all because I can shoot in 30 frames a second, 25 and 24, both in 4K and 1080p. In terms of lens selection, there's a lot to choose from. You have over 107 lenses. Now, a lot of those old ones you're probably not going to want to use for video because the focus motor will make a lot of noise. It may not have image stabilization. And in video, if you're capturing audio, the sound of that lens doing continuous focus is going to be distracting. But in the last 3 to 5 years, Canon has made an awful lot of glass. There's the STM series of lenses, which is that silent stepping motor. And you've got a lot of great lenses like the 24 to 105 version 2 is quiet. Now you might be thinking, well, the RF only has a few lenses, and that's true, they have 6, with 8 more to come out next year, and they are rather expensive lenses. But for anywhere from $0 to $200, depending on the sale of the week, Canon provides an adapter that allows you to put on EF and EF-SS glass onto your Canon EOS R or RP. There's something you need to be aware of. If you're putting on EF-S glass, which is for crop-sensitive cameras such as the 90D or 70D, you're going to suffer a little bit because you're going to get that same 1.6 crop using those lenses. So if you like that full frame sensor, the last thing you want to do is shoot in 4K, which on the EOS RP has a 1.7, 1.6 crop without image enhancement. Now you add an EF-SS, you get another 1.6 crop, it becomes a little silly. So if you're going to adapt and use EF glass, just use the EF and not EF-S. ND filters. This is not something that the ordinary filmmaker will use. I've been shooting for 6 years and I don't use ND filters. And there's very good reasons why I don't use them. They're very expensive. Even a cheap ND filter can cost $100, and I'd have to buy one for each of my lenses. And the problem with the cheap ones is you're going to not be happy with the results, so you end up spending a bit more, and by the time you're done, well, you have to screw them on or screw them off, or you get another rig that allows you to slide the plate in and out. You're dealing with lots of kit, you're dealing with a lot of time, and it's a pain. So I just haven't gone that route. So neither of these cameras come fitted with any sort of ND filters in, and that's not surprising. But I'm tempted to say that the EOS RP does much better in this regard because Canon has released an adapter. It's a $400 adapter that attaches to the camera body and the lens attaches to it. And it's a variable ND filter. So it doesn't matter how many lenses you have, you only need that one ND filter, and you could adjust it from an ND of 2 to 4, 8, what have you. Now, why does this matter? Well, since it's easy to use, we can start to talk about the benefits. And this is something that an ordinary filmmaker who's been filming for 3 or more years is ready for something a bit more advanced. When shooting outside, it's so bright that you need to darken it if you want to be able to open up the lens completely wide. Like I'm using the 51.2 right now. I could not shoot outside at 1.2. I'd probably have to go to something like 5.6 or 8 because of the brightness. What the ND filter does is it's like turning off the sun. It darkens the element, and now the camera can open up wide. And you get that depth of field, you get that blurred background, and it's really, really nice. Now, $400 isn't cheap, but that is a one-time purchase. Yeah, it's not part of the camera body, but it is something that you can use with a Canon EOS R and RP that is just not available for the EF and EF-S mounted lenses. Both cameras have time-lapse. It's nice, but I don't use it a whole lot. Dual SD cards. Yeah, neither camera has it. Sure, I'd like it. I've never lost any video. I've had situations where cards have started to fail. I just generally try to travel with several different cards, and I don't put everything on one. And at the end of the day, I move it off onto a computer or some sort of storage. Clean HDMI out. This is another one of those advanced features that the ordinary filmmaker wouldn't use unless you're producing content for YouTube or you're doing some sort of event work, because what Clean HDMI out allows you to do is to record the information directly from the sensor and then send it externally. That allows you to put it into some sort of external recorder, but more importantly, if you're doing YouTube, you can now do live streaming using the camera. And that's without any sort of overlay. So it's a handy feature to have, but not essential. In terms of photography, the win goes to the EOS RP. After all, it has that full frame sensor that gives you a really nice bokeh and shallow depth of field when you need it. Works really great in low light situations. But one area where the 90D does better is it's able to shoot at 11 frames a second. That's more than twice as fast as what the Canon EOS RP can do at 5 frames a second. And with autofocus on, it's not always getting a good image. You might be down to 3 frames a second. So in most situations, the EOS RP does really well. Now, the Canon 90D does have a 1.6 times crop. But that's not a bad thing. It depends on your scenarios. The nice thing about a 1.6 crop is it works really well for photographers that want to get that zoom, or videographers for that matter. So on a 90D, if I'm using a Canon 100mm macro lens, on my 90D, that's actually 160, which is really, really good for photography of small things like insects or flowers and that kind of stuff. On the EOS RP, it's 100mm. Both cameras have that flip screen. If you're in front of the camera like I am, you should never use it because your eyes should be focused directly on the lens, so you're connecting directly to your audience. But when you're behind the camera, you're shooting down low or you're lifting up high, having that tilt screen is a godsend. And both cameras have it, and it flips, it articulates, it's a great, great feature. Rolling shutter, both cameras have rolling shutter. The 90D is much worse than the EOS RP. However, you can fix that. So for example, if you're shooting 4K video and you bring that into a 1080p project, what you can now do is you can now pan within that 4K frame with 0 rolling shutter. So that is a way of dealing with that particular issue. So which camera is better? Well, let's take another look at this image here. These are all the capabilities that I've talked about today. Those that are green are capabilities that, yeah, they're acceptable. It meets that capability. So the 90D does autofocus really well. It does high detail really well, as does the EOS RP. Those in red, it just doesn't do it to my satisfaction. So looking at the results here, the Canon 90D is the best camera for me. However, I'm going to wait till the end of March to see what's coming out in 2020 before I make my decision, because I think there'll be better cameras coming out. We'll see the 5D Mark V or the EOS version of that 5D Mark V coming out next year. And I really think after 6 years, that's the best camera for me, so I'm willing to wait. But you can use these same capabilities, these same heat maps to help you identify which one's right for you. Where are you in your filmmaking? Are you starting out? If you're starting out, I'd recommend the 90D over the Canon EOS RP. That full frame is nice, but you're going to want to have all those video features that you get in the 90D. You get that 120 frames a second. You get 4K, you get 1080p, and you're able to shoot in 24 and 30 frames a second. The 90D is just a better suited camera for video. I'm never going to try and tell you guys what is right for you, but I want to help you assess the right camera. I spent about a year or two looking at so many different reviews on YouTube that I had a headache after a while. Some people would say this camera's great, some people would say it wasn't, and at the end of the day, I really didn't know what to choose. A lot of videos also, or a lot of YouTubers would also like to show you videos of how one camera compared to another. I found that completely useless when doing high detail because of YouTube's compression. What I started to do is what I did here today with you guys. I identified what capabilities were absolutely important to me and which ones were mandatory, and how well each camera performed in those. So here I am at the end of 2019, and I know that while the 90D could work for me in most times, the lack of All-I, the video recording codec, and lack of detail in 4K and not having focus in 120p has me willing to wait at least 6 more months to see what's coming out in 2020. I think 2020 is going to be a big year. So do you guys have any questions for me? Does this all make sense? If there's anything that I've said that's unclear, drop me a comment below. I respond within 24 hours, and if you're thinking about it, then somebody else probably has an issue. Thank you very much for watching. Please click like and subscribe. They help keep this channel going. We'll see you soon.